So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the penultimate webinar for the MERLIN EU Research Project. We are very lucky today to get Dr. Laurence Carvalho of the Freshwater Ecology section of the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. He is going to talk to us about the solutions for stressed out lakes, bringing to us results from the FutureLakes project, which aims to transform lake restoration through demonstrating nature-based solutions and circular economy solutions. More than just technical, this is creating the right enabling environment and demonstrating that societies and economies benefit from restoring our natural environment. Specifically, he will introduce how this FutureLakes project builds upon MERLIN, adapting and refining many of the component building blocks needed to enable successful freshwater restoration. The format, as always, is about 30 minutes, followed by 30 minutes of questioning. That's flexible. Please, at any time, submit your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring them and then calling on you in turn when the presentation is over. Laurence, thank you so much for coming. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Jan. Let's get my presentation going. Okay, great, and thanks very much for inviting me here, Jörg, Astrid and Jan, to speak about the FutureLakes project, and particularly sort of more generally how we've developed some of the thinking from the MERLIN project into our FutureLakes project to think about how we can restore our stressed out lakes. So I'm going to talk about why we need sort of a transformation in lake restoration. I won't spend too long on that because I think we've heard about that a bit in the MERLIN webinar series. Some of the sort of new opportunities and challenges that we should be thinking about restoration. And then I want to explore what is a sort of systemic and transformative change from both a sort of theoretical sort of background and then what we're doing practically in FutureLakes to sort of try and make that happen, and talk a bit about demonstrating the benefits as well. So FutureLakes is an EU Horizon Europe. It's an innovation action, and it's for 3 years, started about a year ago. I coordinate it in Norwegian Institute for Water Research, and Maven Govan is our project manager, also in NIVA. And then I've put a few names of the key folk who were package leaders, part of the program management board, but they also were very involved in developing the proposal and the ideas within this talk. So I wanted to specifically highlight these people. I also want to sort of, just acknowledge that a lot of these thoughts have developed from the MERLIN project. And so where I will try and mention precisely where through the talk, but many of you will be familiar with some of the concepts and ideas behind this. So it really is, in a way, it's an impact from MERLIN is the FutureLakes proposal and project. The difference is that FutureLakes is actually an action, innovation action in support of the mission Restore Our Ocean and Waters. This is one of several missions the EU have outlined for the next coming 10 years or 5 to 10 years. And the mission Restore Ocean and Waters, often shortened to Mission Ocean, which is not great from a freshwater perspective, but it has 3 main overarching goals. And one is to protect and restore biodiversity. The second is to prevent and reduce pollution. And the third is to create a more sustainable blue economy that's both carbon neutral and circular. Now, FutureLakes was actually funded primarily for that first objective, but to also consider, it also does consider the other 2 objectives. The other thing about the Mission Ocean and Waters is that it talks about 2 really important enablers to making it happen. And the first is public mobilization and engagement in both the design and the delivery of solutions. And the second is access to data, open data, through the development of digital twins. So that's not just data, but it's in terms of modeling of those real-time data to enhance environmental management. So those are two aspects that we consider in FutureLakes as well. So I just want to start with why we need transformation in lake restoration. And again, I won't sort of labour this too much because I think we've all heard about it, but I wanted to particularly focus on why, from a lakes perspective. We've heard a lot about river, the issues that in MERLIN and wetlands, but this really is a lakes perspective. And what I'm showing on here is a graph that illustrates that there has been some success with lake restoration in Europe. And that's particularly for lakes in poor or bad status. I'll go through this graph in a bit more detail. So this graph here shows the ecological quality ratio, or like the ecological status of lake macrophytes in Europe from about 60 to 70 lakes in 6 countries, I think, over the period of the Water Framework Directive. And this bottom line represents a population of lakes that were in either bad or poor status, the red and orange, at the start of the Water Framework Directive. And you can see that there has been improvement in the quality of those lakes, almost getting into the yellow band, the moderate status, in 5 years or so. The middle line is actually those lakes that were in moderate status at the start of the directive monitoring. And you can actually see, or start the first river basin management plan, and you can actually see there's been pretty much no change, or if anything, a slight deterioration in status of those lakes. And then the third is a population of lakes that were either in the high status or good status, which is the policy goal, is good status. And you can actually see from them, again, very stable or potentially even slightly deteriorating status from high to good on average. And so what this does show, I think importantly, it does show that there has been some impact of the Water Framework Directive, particularly for those lakes that are in poor or bad status, that they are coming up to this sort of moderate status. But we see that there really is a problem getting lakes from moderate status into good status. And there are concerns, there is also signs of deterioration of lakes in high, good, and potentially even moderate status. So it does show that we really do need to sort of kickstart restoration still to achieve the WFD goals. And there is a detailed paper that sort of talks about these trends for both lakes and rivers over the first 2 river basin cycles of the Water Framework Directive. And my colleagues in NIVA were involved in that. The other sort of lake sort of issue I wanted to just highlight was climate crisis and how that's impacting lakes. And these 2 figures basically show a couple of things. One is the sort of general trend in surface water temperatures in lakes using Copernicus data. And you can see that there are real increases in lake temperatures in just the last 25 years. And actually the European lakes are increasing at a faster rate. You can see the red dotted line compared to lakes globally. And in fact, Europe is the fastest warming continent, I think, globally, with temperatures, I think, on average, rising twice about the global average rate. And I work in Norway, and if you look at northern Norway, that's even more extreme as well, in areas like Svalbard, in the Arctic Norway. So that really is an issue, just that the general conditions of warming. But associated with that, we're aware of the extremes, and we've had extreme droughts this year and in previous years in different parts of Europe. But there are also these extreme rainfall events, and this is an event that was particularly extreme in Greece, and actually it was Libya, North Africa as well, in 2023. And this was Lake Carla, the original shape of Lake Carla, and this is the flooding. And actually over a year after, there was still floodwaters affecting railway lines and roads in the area. It really wasn't a very extreme event. So it highlights the need of sort of managing our water resources and our lakes is really critical. And we're seeing both the temperature changes and the extreme rainfall are causing changes to nutrient loading, to stratification patterns, and to symptoms of eutrophication like algal blooms. So going back to that's the reason why FutureLakes is really here, to try and tackle those challenges. And I just wanted to quickly highlight the partners involved in FutureLakes. There's 10 partners, and now we've been joined by 3 associated regions from Ireland, Ukraine, and Cyprus, who are going to be looking at our approaches, trying to replicate them, and we're supporting them in developing their river basin management plans. So that's just a quick picture of the consortium under FutureLakes. And we have sort of 6 demonstration sites that are a real focus of the project, which are really trying to showcase best practice and also how innovations in restoration can be integrated into sort of current operational lake basin management. And you can see we've got Norway, Greece, Netherlands, UK, Finland, and Poland. So a sort of quite a contrast and spread across Europe. So in terms of going back to sort of the need for transformation and what theory says about transformative change, and I think there's been a lot of work, particularly by Giels and his sort of co-authors in many papers about system transformation and green transformations. And we have sort of based our FutureLakes sort of conceptual framing around sort of the Giels framework, although it actually does overlap quite a bit with the sort of MERLIN approach to transformative change. So what we're really trying to go is look at current lake basin management practices, and they may vary from bad currently to actually very good currently. And we obviously want to change that so all sites are really operating in a sort of best practice mode. Now, what's really critical to transformation is to actually demonstrate it. And that demonstration really has to be what we would say context dependent. So it's place-based and people-centered. So the need for demonstration sites is really critical in showing transformative change can happen and that it is beneficial. We're an innovation action, so we're particularly supposed to look at the role of innovation in that transformative change process. But we also are also interested really in what are the barriers or enablers of that change, and particularly barriers or enablers to innovations being taken up. And you can see that we're not just talking about technological innovation or technological barriers, but we're really thinking about these other aspects of management, basically basin management. So engagement with sectors, with society, the governance of lake basins, the policies, and whether they're conflicting or cohesive, and financing of restoration measures. And you can just sort of see here that there are, aspects that are what we would consider bad or poor on the left. So limited water literacy, for example, or fragmented governance. And then we've got elements that we would say those, of better practice, so a more engaged literate public, or bundled financing of public-private financing, for example. And it's important to say, going back to this, that these barriers and enablers can change the sort of external landscape that we're operating at, and this is very much part of the Giels framework, can change. And just two examples from a changing policy landscape. We've got the EU Nature Restoration Regulation, and freshwater ecosystems and species are very much part of that. And then catchment management restoration measures are also part of it in terms of some of the other landscapes it talks about: urban landscapes, agricultural landscapes, forest landscapes. There are sort of restoration plans for those different landscapes. And all countries in the EU now have to develop these national restoration plans for the Nature Restoration Regulation. And those have to be a draft by in about 1 year's time, and those finalized plans after receiving comments to be delivered by September 27, which is pretty much the endpoint of FutureLakes. So our project is really sort of mapping onto this period of implementing nature restoration plans for the national restoration plans for the Nature Restoration Regulation. But there are some aspects of the Nature Restoration Regulation I just wanted to highlight. One is there is a call within these plans that countries really think about policy coherence, and particularly synergies with climate change, mitigation and adaptation actions. And there it sort of really talks about nature-based solutions, for example. But also common agricultural policy in that is highlighted. And the other thing, it really does talk about the sort of co-benefits of restoration, these economic and social benefits, that we need to think about those in our national restoration plans. So it does take this more, let's say, systemic approach compared to, say, maybe earlier versions of biodiversity strategies. And then the other is even newer. It was this summer, it came into was adopted, and that's the EU Water Resilience Strategy, which is an initiative. So it's not a piece of legislation as such, but it has quite a large number of actions. If you go to the annex of the Water Resilience Strategy, you'll see a large number of actions that are going to be taken in the next 3 years or so. I can't quite remember the timetable, but and two aspects I just wanted to highlight is it really focuses on governance and development of communities of practice, and particularly in terms of communities of practice in terms of reducing nutrient pollution and exchanging best practices on sponge landscapes. And I think we've heard from the Spongescape project already in this webinar series. And then it talks about financing for upscaling restoration, and in particular, quite a big focus on nature credits there's going to be, and how those are incentivized, particularly for agriculture and for farming. So I think those are really positive developments in the sort of policy landscape over the next few years. So I talked about the sort of what we're trying to do in terms of transformative systemic change, but then you need to start thinking about, well, how do we break down that sort of conceptual plan into practical steps? And I really like this sort of let's say approaches to transformation that have been developed in MERLIN by the team at James Hutton Institute. So Esther Carmen, Hassan, Kirsty, and colleagues at James Hutton Institute, and it's just, I think, come out, it's being published now, this approach. And they talk about 3 sort of dimensions to transformation. There's innovation, but there is also maintaining best practice or things that are good, and then disrupting bad practice or things that are either barriers to positive change. And I think in FutureLakes, we're trying to take that framework and think about how we break that down into these different areas or different enablers of restoration, so that we can actually think about innovation, maintenance, and disruption in all these areas. And also ideally, although I would say we're doing this less than MERLIN, is working within sectors to understand these 3 dimensions of systemic change or transformative change as well. So it's very much across the project, you'll see that focus on not just innovation, but on maintaining the good and disrupting the bad. So I just wanted to say a bit about incremental change and disruptive change as well, because you hear quite a lot about disruptive change is the way to get transformation in business and things like that. But I actually quite like this book here, this book called The Great Mind Shift, which is really about explores how you get systemic change. And it really talks about that there is actually usually a need for little steps to create transformative change, because any sort of big changes are likely to face a lot of resistance unless they're well prepared through these steps, like some sort of pioneering activity, coalition building, getting the regulations in place for change, and then the anchoring of social acceptance in the change. And so if you can get all these steps in place, you can hopefully reach a tipping point where you achieve change. Now we see politicians around the world, notably Donald Trump, who are trying to basically disrupt through more sort of rapid processes, let's say, and you can see there's a lot of damage often when if you try and go for disruption without careful planning. So I then wanted to think about systemic and transformative change in sort of lake restoration, and actually there is quite a nice example of both incremental and disruptive measures in lake restoration, and this is the alternative stable states theory of Martin Skeffer and colleagues, which talks about lakes either existing in a sort of clear macrophyte dominated state or a turbid algal dominated state. And you can get incremental change, you can get sort of system shifts through just small incremental changes in nutrient conditions. So you can gradually increase nutrients into the system or decrease nutrients, and the systems will potentially shift. Although there are these feedback systems that sort of stabilize the systems in either clear or turbid, but in intermediate nutrient conditions, for example, it's more easy to get shifts between different years between the two states. But you can also have disruption of the system, and in fact a lot of lake management focuses on considering positive disruption, such as biomanipulations or planting of submerged macrophyte beds, to try and shift the feedback mechanisms towards more the clear water state. And then we can have very negative disruptions, such as overstocking of benthivorous fish. So it does show that you can have both disruptive and incremental change can lead to system change. Although we now see that there's not so much. If you look at lakes generally around Europe, then most of the change actually happens through incremental change. So I want to think about those three aspects: innovation, disruption, good practice, and just sort of illustrated with things that we're either doing in FutureLakes or already have completed. And one of the first deliverables from FutureLakes was this review of innovative technical solutions. And this was, you can get this from the FutureLakes website. I'll put the link at the bottom below. But in this review, we've largely sort of classified lake solutions into in-lake solutions, or solutions for the external catchment. And we have largely thought about nature-based solutions, circular economy solutions, and what we call biodiversity-focused solutions, which are neither really nature-based or circular economy. They're just focused on restoring the biodiversity, whether that's through grey infrastructure or habitat creation, or a mixture of measures that are neither circular or nature, or sometimes include those. So we felt it was important to actually think about solutions that maybe don't fit into those two categories of nature-based and circular economy. And we're basically, all these 78 measures have been explored for their effectiveness in relation to the different aims of the mission ocean, so pollution reduction, biodiversity restoration, and climate resilience. And if you look at the review, you can we try to gather as much cost information on implementing these solutions, and also assess technology readiness levels. Also we've talked about, we've thought very much about national restoration plans in this, and so have structured the solutions in relation to these different landscapes in the different articles of the nature restoration regulation, to allow member states to sort of hopefully find and identify suitable solutions. I should also say that we also review what we would call bad solutions, whether we feel there's no evidence, no strong evidence that they are good solutions. And we also talk about bad implementation of what can be good solutions, but they shouldn't be applied in certain contexts, like mixing of lake water columns you wouldn't apply in a shallow lake, for example. So it's quite a nice detailed overview of those 78 measures. And I guess you could put it in focusing on 4 main areas. There's reducing nutrient and water use in the landscape, retaining water and nutrients on land, recovering legacy nutrients and excess biomass, and then restoring habitat conditions and structural complexity. So it's worth having a look at that. Just to say, in FutureLakes, we've got these 6 demo basins, but we've actually got slightly broader, a larger number of innovation pilots of specific measures at not just the 6 demo sites, but more further afield as well. And that's because the demo basins are really looking at trying to integrate solutions and then looking at engagement, financing and policy, whereas these 10 pilots are really just looking at, well, what is the cost effectiveness of the measures in terms of, are they effective in what they aim to do, restore biodiversity or reduce pollution, and are they cost effective? What's the cost of implementing them? So it's a much more detailed look at that aspect of the measures. And this just sort of illustrates the 10 we're looking at. So 4 are nature-based, such as the sand filters and 2-stage channels in Finland. 3 are circular solutions, and I'll talk about them a bit more in the next couple of slides. And then 3 are biodiversity-focused solutions, which include biomanipulation is actually in there, and that's also linked to a sort of circular blue economy in terms of producing some nice tinned fish out of it. And then some island creation in Markermeer in the Netherlands is an incredible project. And also 3 Dutch studies of smaller lakes, which really have explored the sort of issue of blending lots of different types of measures that are needed often. So in terms of circular solutions, there's 2 main types we're looking at. One is about recovering phosphorus, legacy phosphorus from lake sediments. And I think we're taking pretty advanced approach. We've got 2 amazing demonstrations of this, whole lake demonstrations. One is in Denmark, and that's really been developing very innovative approaches to harvesting. They're currently looking for financing for a second, more solar-powered version of this harvesting raft. They've also been looking really doing lots of development work on dewatering sediment, and that's one of the big issues of tackling sediment recovery. And I should say this isn't just under FutureLake funding, but it's had a lot of funding from a private foundation as well. And then the other study of that is in Kartuzy Lakes in Poland, and they've got a really novel way of transporting sediment from the lakes through gravity feeding to this newly built sewage treatment works, in a way that is really largely focused on treating the sediments from the lake. And then both projects are looking at the application of those sediments in agriculture, with a number of trials going on in Denmark as part of one of our sister projects called Ferro, and I'll just mention them at the end as well. But so we have 1 demo site in collaboration with another project funded under the same call. And they're really looking at the agricultural application. And then the other one that I'm personally very excited about, because it's my sort of interest, is actually, can we, in a way, turn or disrupt what a very negative issue with lakes, and that's harmful algal blooms of cyanobacteria, and try and create a market out of restoring those and harvesting those. And so we've been, this summer in August in Finland, we were trialing, I think, 3 or 4 different harvesting technologies. And the Nature Restoration Centre in Lithuania is the lead on developing technologies for harvesting algal blooms. And we also worked with this spin-off from a food processing system, where they talk to the people there, and they're quite interested in trialing their food processing system in terms of filtering out algae from lakes. And so we've been trialing how effective and cost efficient and energy, how much energy use involved in these different trialing. You can see here a picture of some of the harvested material, very rich in cyanobacteria. And then as part of FutureLakes, we're looking at the constituents of this sort of mixed assemblage from lakes, and exploring what potential compounds are present that could be taken up for more sort of high value products. And we're working with another Mission Ocean and Waters project that's actually coordinated by NIVA as well, Locality, which is really looking at the sort of market end of using algal products. So we're identifying the sort of the compounds that are present within these blooms, and they're looking at particularly how you could refine that material and develop high value products from that. So I think those are 2 really sort of quite exciting areas of innovation, technical innovation, but we're also looking at innovation in governance. We're looking at how we can make lake basin management more systemic, and that's like bringing WFD ecosystem focused management together with flood and drought risk management much more closely. And the WFD has been trying to do that, integrating with the floods directive, but we're really trying to take that a little bit further with some innovative governance frameworks on flood and drought risk. And then also sort of more enhanced platforms for dialogue within lake governance, and that's creating critical friends groups, which are trying to identify those stakeholders in lake basin catchments who are affected by the lake quality and the restoration, and particularly who are influential in it as well, but they're not generally included in current lake basin management. And we're trying to work with them to create their visions of the lakes for the future, and then bring them together with the existing sort of lake basin management groups to sort of identify priorities for future restoration. So we're sort of expanding the sort of the more formal river basin management groups or lake basin management groups to consider these other stakeholders. And for example, in Norway, we're looking downstream at the Oslo fjord and trying to bring those stakeholders up into the lake catchment. We're also looking at best practice, and what I wouldn't say, we're not calling it bad practice, but strong and weak practices in governance, more mature and less mature forms of governance, and probably the most mature or strongest form of lake basin management is in Finland, and with Lake Vesijärvi, where they have created a formal coordinating body, a foundation, focused specifically on lake restoration and protection over the long term. This has very clear regional mandate with sort of board representation from cities, municipalities, businesses, utilities. There's stakeholders from include citizens, researchers, energy companies, and it has a very sort of interesting diversified funding, a lot through municipal contributions, but also through national or European grants, and also a sort of public sort of crowdfunding donation system, sort of godparent scheme. And the other thing, it's very much focused on sort of fostering social learning and community ownership of the problem, and runs this really interesting annual week, which focused on lake education and also focused on practical tasks of lake restoration. And there's science and evidence is really very much a part of that Vesiavi Foundation's work. So they're really interested in doing best practice and innovating and working with researchers on that. And they even are very involved in this every 3 years, organising this Lati Lakes International Conference on lake restoration. So it really is a sort of beacon of how you do lake governance. And I don't know whether I should be doing this, but I want to just talk about one that we consider the sort of currently the weakest form of governance, but not historically, I should say. And that's Loch Leven in the UK, which is a really important site for many reasons, cultural and economically. But now they did have a very active catchment management group, but because it wasn't formalized in any way, and there was no explicit dedicated coordinating body, then that has fallen apart in recent years since COVID, and currently there is no coordination. Okay, yeah, and probably another 5-10 minutes, but that's okay. But there's a lot of, you can see it where that lack of a formal catchment management group means that the responsibilities for lake governance are really dispersed and fragmented, and there's no real shared ownership now of the lake management. And I should say this is currently, in the last 5 years, it was much better in previous historically. But now great funding instability, there's scientific monitoring's been cut, and no sort of really ongoing continuous support for restoration measures. It does have some good public engagement, and so I think it's not necessarily all bad, but it's just clearly at the weaker end for many of these aspects. So it has become so in the last 5 years. And then just to say about citizen science, we believe that's really can be a transformative force. We've just completed a catalogue of citizen science initiatives that are sort of lake related, which is available as a spreadsheet. And you can actually filter on that spreadsheet to try and compare and find suitable schemes for different contexts. And there's just some of the criteria that you can sort of filter the spreadsheet on to try and select citizen science schemes that are relevant for you. In FutureLakes, we're actually going to have some coordinated campaigns in terms of the different forms of citizen science for the different aims of the mission objectives. And you can see some of the approaches that we're carrying out here. We found there were no really strong citizen science schemes in terms of measuring the blue economy. And so we are looking at very much a sort of bespoke community-led survey design for that. And I just want to illustrate how citizen science can then lead to be transformative and turn into action and can disrupt the status quo. And this is in Loch Ness in Northern Ireland, where the Blue in Algae app has been widely used and adopted by the National Environment Agency. And that was then really, through publicity of that, we were really able to track a very serious sort of bloom that developed in Loch Ness, and you could track its movement around the loch, down the river system, and actually the toxic blooms onto the sort of coastal water beaches around the top of Northern Ireland. And that then led to sort of huge public outcry over the state of the Loch Ness. I mean, it supplies 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water, so it's pretty critical. And has now led to sort of very large investment to try and tackle it. And this is just the first stage in investment. I think there's some more planned soon. So it does show the sort of potential power of citizen science. And then I'm going to have to rush through these, Jan, but we are then looking at how that process of transformation can go on at a basin scale. So first identifying needs and getting acceptance of needs, planning the restoration program, implementing it, and then evaluation. And the stuff I've got in red highlights the importance of data and evidence in this restoration process, planning process, and the need for community support in many of these aspects. And so we do feel these are two really critical components, is having good evidence and having good community support. And this is where we're adopting the sort of MERLIN monitoring framework. We're tweaking it a bit. This is slightly different to what we've done in MERLIN. We brought in tourism sector, and WFD is a bit more explicit. But our use of it is very much the same, exploring how the restoration programme is achieving its aims, maximising co-benefits and recognising trade-offs. And we've been looking at those outcomes across the 6 demo basins. I'm going to just skip that slide. I'm going to skip that as well. So yeah, just to sort of summarise the FutureLakes blueprint for lake restoration, it's about all these areas. It's about developing knowledge and capacity, innovation, best practice, disrupting bad practice, and increasing literacy. And we're trying to demonstrate that in practice at these 6 demo basins. We are also creating a knowledge hub, a data portal, and you can already go onto the website and see the metadatabase and get access to all the data sets that we think are going to be useful for lake management. And we're developing a prioritization process to identify at a country or European level which lakes should be prioritized for restoration, focusing on our primary aims and then these co-benefits that can be weighted by country. And we'll probably have a case study of Denmark in that. So we've got a roadmap for upscaling that we are going through the process. We've got our 6 demo sites, our 3 associated regions, this upscaling roadmap with this prioritization, and then finally trying to develop a community of practice to achieve the Mission Ocean goals. And we're doing that with 3 sister projects that we got funded with, and we collectively call ourselves Mission Lakes at a European level to sort of maybe make the emphasis of Mission Ocean and Waters a little bit more balanced to fresh waters and lakes. So have a look out for Mission Lakes and those 3 other projects on your social media. And that's it, Jan. I will leave it there with just a few links to our website, email, and LinkedIn.
Thank you very much, Laurence. Part of the lenience on my end is that you are joining an elite and legendary group, which you have generated exactly 1 question. Probably, I'm hoping, is an index of the cohesiveness and the lucidity of your presentation. But we do have 1 question at this moment, and I'll call on that, and anyone after. Oh, I see a second one appearing. So the first question from Peter Boots: where do you situate the use of FOSLOC, the precipitation of phosphorus, as a solution? And do you see this as a nature-based solution? He makes a comment: we are monitoring the effect and hope for positive outcome. We are now looking for different solutions in Belgium, including the use of biological reactors or plant systems in combination with bacteria to get the phosphorus out. Interested in outcomes of FutureLakes and the possible applications elsewhere.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Nice to see you. Yeah, I think I'll be honest. I'm going to be very open here. There are mixed views on the use of FOSLOC amongst the consortium. And personally, I'm not a strong believer. I believe FOSLOC is very expensive, and it's basically capturing the phosphorus in the lake rather than trying to recover it. And from the evidence of several whole lake studies so far, it is very effective in the short term, I think. And when I say short term, 2-3 years, maybe more. But then you would often need to reapply it. And it should really, anyway, only be used once you've got your external catchment sources under control. Otherwise, you will have to keep reapplying it, and it is very expensive to use it. So personally, I feel we should be looking much more towards these circular solutions of removing legacy phosphorus, whether that's through the sediment or actually using the algae to extract the sediment from the phosphorus from the sediment and extract the algae. And I think they are sort of in a way a better approach that we should be doing rather than trying to put more chemicals in to just try and latch it. But I should say that through two of the Dutch innovation pilots have used Boslock, and I've been involved in the study in Scotland as well. And you know, they are sometimes useful in a small lake context. I would say never really suitable for big lakes because of the cost. But there are mixed views. Some people in the consortium are quite supportive of it in certain contexts.
So the second question, Axel Schwerk, Merlin deals with different and probably more diverse case studies. Therefore, do you see differences in key stakeholders, and does it impact the approach as to how to address the stakeholders?
Yeah, thanks, Axel. That's a good question. It is, the 6 cases are really diverse in terms of already where they're starting at in terms of stakeholder engagement. And so you see the Finnish, the Dutch and the Norwegian case studies in a way are probably much more advanced on that and less so in the UK, Polish and Greek ones. But then it is all a bit different. So the Polish one has been really good in terms of public engagement, I think, by the council. So it does address where their starting points and therefore what their sort of next step is in stakeholder engagement. And so they're all the 6 demos have been doing their stakeholder mapping and analysis, following the Merlin method very much, or a little bit tweaked, and looking at that level of stakeholder, the participation ladder, and where they're at, which stakeholders are missing from the dialogue, and trying to particularly identify those sort of influential or greatly affected stakeholders, and get them engaged in different ways. So it definitely just changes the approach at each case study. That would be my general answer.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I see a comment. I'm not sure if it's from Ewan Lowry saying still lots going on at Lochleven, and he gives a link to the For the Rivers Trust, a particular link if anyone wants to.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Ewan wants to comment on that.
I'll let you comment if you want, and I can comment that it's historically is really great stuff that's gone on at Lochleven in terms of catchment management, but it's, I guess, the lack of formalization or creation of a sort of management body formally that has meant it has sort of fallen apart quite a lot in recent years. But saying that, there's some great innovations that we are highlighting at Lochleven. One of them is the lens, the financing, local enterprise networks financing approach. I think that's really cutting edge and really positive what's happening there at Lochleven. The other is the planning policy that the local authority brought on, this 125% rule for any new builds have to reduce their phosphorus footprint by 125% to compensate for the building of new settlements in the catchment. So those are 2 incredibly important innovations that we are trying to highlight to showcase really excellence amongst our demo basins. So, and there has been excellent work there in the past. It's just the government, this was based on an interview with our demo basin lead at UKCH, who was quite critical of the current lake basin management setup, really, I think. So that's where the analysis of the governance was, the current version of governance is, but it was positive about the historical governance.
I see another comment, but no question. We have another 8 minutes. In that momentary vacuum, I'll take my prerogative as moderator to ask a question as a systems ecologist. and that is the example you used from Martin's Keffer. We try to alert our students that this is an example of how we get into these problems because people don't understand nonlinear change. And so you can slowly back into a problem without realizing you're in dangerous ground, and suddenly it jumps to another stability domain where suddenly the rules are totally different. And to get back, yes, incremental change will get there, but it can be incredibly disheartening how much incremental change before it jumps back into the original stability domain. So that, what they call hysteresis, it should be a warning sign. So I agree, we can say if we are persistent with incremental change, you can eventually get it, but often the diagnosis of how you got into the problem and why you're having so much trouble getting back is in that diagram. And as much as Martin Scheffer has revealed about Lake Vire in the Netherlands, they still would admit that they don't fully understand why it did what it did. After such incredibly intelligent work for so long, it's a mystery.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to stress that, yeah, the nutrient change needed to come back is hard. And that's why people look at using disruptions like biomanipulation or water level change. And you only really can do that in generally small, shallow lakes, very shallow lakes. And actually, that's why for large, deep lakes, you've really only got the reducing nutrients, and that will be expensive and costly. So it is always much better to protect your lakes and try and retain your nutrients in the catchment, as going to be much more cost effective than trying to restore them once they've actually degraded. So yeah, no, I agree. There's the hysteresis in those models. It's important.
I was hoping to provoke another question with a provocative, I see a question. From Charity Barasa in Kenya, the question is it possible to develop an ecological model using nutrient dynamics, temperature fluctuations, and the biological indicators? We need another seminar for that.
So there are some very good lake ecosystem models out there. One is FutureLakes, developed in the Netherlands. It particularly was developed for shallow lakes, but I think it's now more broadly available for works in other lakes. And it's got various bolt-ons for different biological responses, ecosystem service responses, I think. So that's one I would point you towards, FutureLakes. There's My Lake, I think, used more in Australia, New Zealand, those parts, or maybe America. So that's the other big lake ecosystem model that I'm aware of. And there are some specific models for sort of algal bloom modeling, and that's Protec and other models for algal bloom modeling. So there are some good models out there in the literature that you should be able to follow up on. But I recommend FutureLakes and My Lake, I guess, as the starters.
Well, I think we may be at the end. I am sorry that you had to rush through the last 3 or 4 slides. They looked extremely interesting. So again, our thanks for a very clear lecture. Covered a huge amount of ground. And I'd like to announce at this point the next, and I believe the final webinar for Merlin will be on the 1st of December. The subject, I think, is to be announced, or maybe it has been, and I'm behind.
I can announce it right now. Mm-hmm. The next webinar will be about the Merlin Academy. And then we will have a series of webinars in a week in February or March next year that will present all the Merlin results, presented in a series of webinars.
Well, as they say in German, Zeit vom Wunder, we are on time. And so it's thank you everyone for excellent participation and a great lecture. We look forward to seeing you then in a few weeks in December. So Until then.
Thanks very much, Jan. Thanks, Astrid and Jörg.